you traditionally get lower minimums, definitely domestically in the US, but also with a lot of factories in Europe and throughout Latin America. So instead of having to go produce, 5,000 units of something overseas, they are eager to do test runs, kind of do their product development, get off the ground and be less financially exposed. Even if it's a little more expensive, that cost of again, being like less financially on the hook is worth it to them. So they will often kind of go for that nearshoring option for that production flexibility.
Do you have a brilliant product idea but don't know where to start to get it made? Or are you looking to level up your product but afraid to take it overseas?
If so, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Jackie.
And I'm Erin, and we are
the Sourcing Gals,
your trusted guides to everything you need to know about sourcing, manufacturing, and scaling your product overseas. Whether you are just starting out or you've been making your own product for a while, we are here to help women source products overseas without the overwhelm.
In each episode, we'll share insider tips, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories to help you source more effectively, save time, and boost your profits. Duh! We know how hard it can be to juggle the ins and outs of product development, but don't worry, we've got your back.
So grab a cup of coffee, get comfy, and let's dive into how you can grow your business,
make more money,
and turn your products into profit. Welcome to
the Sourcing Gals. Now let's get started. High five.
Hi. Running a product-based business is complicated enough. Your banking shouldn't be. That's why we use Mercury. It's a free, intuitive banking platform built for entrepreneurs. No monthly fees, and get this, no wire fees ever. Plus, it integrates with QuickBooks, making bookkeeping a breeze. And the best part? Their credit card gives you 1.5% cash back with a holiday bonus of 2.5% cash back on ad spend. Terms do apply. Banking doesn't have to be complicated. Join me and thousands of other founders using Mercury. Learn more and sign up today using the link in the show notes. Welcome, Liz. We are so excited that you're here with us on the Sourcing Gals this week. This interview we've been very excited about for a while because, well, I think you guys are going to probably understand why as soon as we get into it. This is something that a lot of listeners have shown interest in and have asked us about. And that is nearshore manufacturing. And it's an area where we've been able to use our manufacturing and sourcing experience to find factories through our own methods. But this is an entirely different method.
Yeah. And I'm excited because back in my OG Abercrombie days, all my production was out of Peru. So it was technically pretty near shore, right? It was same time zone that I would talk with my suppliers in, which is very different than what I do today. But when it comes to finding new factories near shore, which we'll talk about what that means as well, that has definitely been a challenge in my own product development journey, working with clients and customers that want to bring things stateside or want to bring things closer to home. And it just hasn't really been a great tool. There wasn't an Alibaba per se for nearshore manufacturing. And so I'm really excited that we have Liz here today because basically she's come in and helped change the landscape here, truly.
Absolutely. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So I think it'd be great, Liz, to just start about your background. So transparency team, we did chat with Liz a couple weeks ago just to learn more about her, more about this amazing platform that she's building. So we'll get into that. But I think what we also just really enjoyed was your passion for manufacturing and how excited and how dynamic our conversation was. We totally nerded out. So I'd love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about your background and just, what got you into manufacturing.
So like many people in this space, I started out on the brand side, right? So I started out making stuff and I was doing it a long time ago, like when this kind of start of Shopify. We were one of the initial Shopify stores when they first launched. Using things like Alibaba back then was kind of novel and new. So it was a long time ago and we succeeded. So we had a successful brand. We sold, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of units of product. But I've always been entrepreneurial and always seen kind of new ideas and openings. And I really recognized that there was very little support for product-based founders. And again, this was 20 years ago at this point. There's more now, but still it is kind of a missing link because it's so specific and the challenges that those kind of physical product entrepreneurs go through are so unique. But I had a really hard time, even though we were kind of successful on paper. A lot of the background noise was really painful. We would lose a lot of money, was really stressed out all the time. And I just thought, like, I want to take everything that I've learned and kind of help other people do it, which is a really common story arc, I think, for a lot of people. I also was lucky during that phase that I had a few factory kind of owners take me under their wing, some in China, some in the US. I got this kind of global perspective on, like, how does it really work inside a manufacturing facility? How do you succeed? Like, how do you do things the right way? And so that happened kind of earlier in my career. And then that transitioned into all sorts of other things. And what I've done the most over the years is launch, we've had a product accelerator, and I have launched many physical products across a lot of different categories because it's kind of all the same formula, right? Give or take. And so that's what I was doing before we launched Nearshore.
Amazing. So very exciting. You guys can see, our listeners could probably understand why we connected on a pretty deep level with Liz and got really excited about the potential in conversation here. But we'll get into what Liz has built here at the end of this podcast. But first, let's educate. We're going to educate our listeners and even myself, to be honest. I'd love to learn more about
Absolutely. Same here.
nearshoring. So let's first have you explain, what does nearshoring mean? What is it? And how does that compare to the word offshore, which I think we use all the time, a lot on this podcast?
I think typically people will use offshore as a catch-all for anything not domestic.
Correct.
And that's not true.
Yeah. So help break this down for us and our listeners.
Yeah. So the definitions are kind of somewhat what you make them, right? So we could start as far away as offshore, which if you're a business based in the US, that would traditionally be producing somewhere like China. And then we have the concept of reshoring, which is bringing your production back, to your neighborhood, to your home country. In between that, we have the concept of nearshoring, which is getting your production as close to home as possible. And so our definition with our platform has been domestically or close, close by. And so because we have a lot of US brands, we've included Latin America in that. And we've also included Europe because those are, closer time zone aligned, faster shipping, and a lot of other kind of benefits that come with that. So that's our definition, but, everyone might have a little different way of looking at it.
That's great. I appreciate you explaining that because I didn't realize it was just like trying to get nearer to where you are. But the thing that's interesting about that is that maybe if it were someone in Southern California, that could look like Latin America or South America. If it's someone in New York, that could look like England, so it might just vary based on your location. But also the purpose, I guess, would just be a smaller carbon footprint or making like the time zone more accessible or making what do people usually come to you in terms of like their purpose for coming nearshore?
So there's a handful of benefits and different brands want different ones. So one of the main ones from the perspective of a US business is that you traditionally get lower minimums, definitely domestically in the US, but also with a lot of factories in Europe and throughout Latin America. So instead of having to go produce, 5,000 units of something overseas, they are eager to do test runs, kind of do their product development, get off the ground and be less financially exposed. Even if it's a little more expensive, that cost of again, being like less financially on the hook is worth it to them. So they will often kind of go for that nearshoring option for that production flexibility. So that's number one. The second is just a kind of cultural comfort. So working in your own language, especially when you're developing more complex products, can just feel easier and feel better. Things don't get lost in translation, but there's just like a familiarity that some people, it's important to them. Other people, it doesn't matter as much. When we get into products where there's more intellectual property concerns, it does become more of kind of like a clinical consideration because the IP in certain countries, I won't name names, but is not as protected, there's different norms around copying. And when you get into countries like the US, but also throughout Latin America, there's just less overall imitation from factories. And that might change in the future, but that has historically been what it is. There's also just a lot more laws to protect someone in their own country, right? If someone copies you in, I don't know, pick a faraway place, are you really going to go litigate there? Are you going to, contractually, that would be a very expensive, time consuming, kind of intimidating thing. So producing domestically or closer to home can be beneficial in that regard. Then we move into some of like the environmental concerns, right? There is absolutely like lower carbon footprint, and this is super important to some people. The shipping time is probably what we see the most. Like that's what we hear about the most, because you'll get something from Colombia and it'll be there in like 5 to 7 days, right? Versus waiting a couple months. So that's a big advantage. And when a brand can get their costs within like 10 to 20% similar, but they can get product in, half the time, a fraction of the time, that's going to be hugely beneficial to them. And then, we get into time zone advantage, not having to wake up in the middle of the night. I spent a lot of my 20s like setting an alarm for 1 a.m. to go and like deal with things. So a lot of people really like that.
That as well.
Yes.
I still have calls with China and I'll say, it has to be after the kids are in bed, but before I'm like too tired to function.
Yes. Yeah. So that can be nicer. And then the final thing is just the ability to visit your factory. Again, for some people, this feels really good to them. And they're making decisions about their business and their production just based on a sense of control. Like I can go, it's going to be a quick flight. I can go and, go and come in a day or two, and it's not going to be a whole big thing. And so they really like that. And I get that. It makes it more enjoyable.
Absolutely.
So when you think about, nearshoring versus offshoring, right? Being on the other side of the globe. You talked about some of the differences here, some of the benefits. What happens when it comes to raw materials, right? Because I just know from my past that a lot of raw materials are still being made in those further away countries. So I'm just curious, how does that affect timing within Nearshore, or have they built their own infrastructure? Is that kind of a farce and not really as much of an issue in today's production economy as it used to be in the past?
It's absolutely still an issue. So there's a few things, and one of them ties into tariffs, which we actually did not discuss, and I kind of should have started with, because that's like been the main impetus recently, right? Because there's been so many tariff changes that people are getting kind of the same cost on things. Our, shipping experts that we work with say that tariffs will likely kind of stay put, that they've been added. They're likely to kind of stay put for a few years. We've gotten a lot of panicked brands kind of coming to us for that reason. And nearshoring makes a lot more sense all of a sudden. But materials kind of play into that. So as you know, when you import something, you pay a duty, a tariff on the total cost of what you're importing. So what some people have started to do when they have material challenges, in that they can only get the materials that they need from China, from somewhere else, is that they'll still import the material and they'll pay the tariff on that. But then they'll do all the assembly and production in the US or in Brazil, somewhere else, right? Somewhere else closer. And they'll take advantage of tariff kind of benefits from doing that, because they're not being taxed kind of on the whole unit cost. So that's been a kind of creative hybrid thing that we've seen that I think is really cool. Materials it's half and half. Some people still have to import whatever it is they're making. Others don't. There are a lot of free trade kind of agreements in certain countries where they've brought in materials that are duty free, even though they're imported, and then you can use them for your production. So it's pretty unique. Kind of need to talk to the factory that you're considering working with on the material side. Yes, it's a problem. Not always, I guess would be my answer. And it depends what you're making. We also see some of the more advanced factories who have like deep experience, right, for a long time, doing a lot of redesign and kind of re-engineering on products to source materials that they specifically don't have to import. And they're doing that not just for huge brands, right? We see them doing it for like smaller to medium entrepreneurs too, because sometimes it's like a big fancy word, re-engineer, but sometimes it's just like, hey, let's just use this. It is not that complicated. That's why your factory partner can be a really great product development collaborator from that sense.
That leads me to another question, which we did not put on the questions we sent over. So if you're not prepared for this, just tell me so. It leads me to another question, which is, are there these big material markets over, near shore that factories have access to, similar to how there are in like an India and a China?
Not in the same way. No, you have the LA fabric spots, but it's not set up here in the same way to do that. So
very nitty-gritty question, just so I'm curious. So if you have a factory, let's say in Peru, because back when I worked in Peru, everything was made with cotton. It was all homegrown within the country. But let's say that I was doing a polyester that they could not get, or a synthetic that they could not get in Peru. So my factory in Peru is importing the fabric from China. Then the finished goods are obviously coming from Peru to the US. Does that duty and tariff that's coming from China, does that kind of get null and void, because it's really about the finished good that matters coming into the US from Peru? So Peru's connection with China is very different, that tariff, than what, we're paying here in the US.
Yes. Yeah. So you would be paying, whatever you're paying the factory is what you're paying the tariff on. So if the factory's charging you $5 per item, it doesn't really, like that's what you're going to be paying the tariff on. So it would depend on the factory's tariff relationship with what they're bringing in and kind of how they're handling that.
Sure. I would assume, like, let's say Peru's only have a 2% duty on that fabric. You'd be reimbursing the factory for that 2% or something to that effect. Probably.
Right.
But that's interesting, though. If you were buying the factory direct coming to America, though, that tariff could look very different.
Oh, yeah.
Again, so you're still able to get that raw material that you need. But then, again, it's just coming to you in a more advantageous way then by having the cut make being done in a country that is not paying that same rate.
Right.
That's my question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know what I recommend that people do? We have some great shipping people we work with that will do like 15-minute free consults. So they'll say, oh, you're making jewelry or you're making leather goods or whatever it is. Here's the most tariff beneficial countries for that particular category, right? Because every country and every category has different variations and different combinations of what you'll pay. So that can be really worth it. And again, even if you're smaller, I think a lot of people when they're smaller, they hear about these kind of services or they hear about like a quality control inspection or something that sounds very formal. And they're like, well, that's not for me yet. And it is. All of this stuff is good. Even if you don't use it right away, you're kind of armed with information for the future. In a lot of these countries, like we work a lot in Colombia, El Salvador, Honduras, there are small batch manufacturers just as much as there are large ones. Like it's not, there's something for everyone.
Sure. One of my favorite jewelry manufacturers I've ever worked with was in Colombia. And I'm going to just like go off on a side here for a second. But they had this model where they would put all of the pieces and parts for all of the jewelry together in these like batch kits and send them home with moms. And the moms would assemble at home so that they could like work while they have kids and they didn't have to pay for childcare. And then they'd bring the finished goods back to the factory for like QA and all that stuff. So they were like really big proponents. But anyway, they were such an amazing factory to work with, and they were out of Colombia. They were awesome. But and then a separate thing is just that a lot of jewelry that I've done has been from the Dominican Republic because it was a zero duty to the U.S. I don't know if that's still the case. It was at the time, and a short flight.
Yeah. It's a big location for that. And you just reminded me of something. A big request we get, and one of the kind of the other benefits is this either sustainable or ethical angle that people want to factories. They feel working conditions are better. They feel that there's just more transparency and visibility into whatever kind of vertical they care about, whether it's like sustainable materials or factories that have a lot of solar, whatever it is, or the actual worker kind of conditions and programs. We tend to see a bigger proportion of those types of factories and programs in Latin America specifically compared to other countries. There's a lot of kind of like artisanal work that's still affordable, right? You have a lot of like the artisanal work in places like Europe, but the labor is so expensive that it's a little more challenging. But in Central South America, there's a lot of co-ops, that you can work with. Again, for some brands, depending on their value system and product, that's like a really cool opportunity and they get excited about that.
When you think about types of products that are better fit for nearshoring, do any come to mind more so than others?
Yes. So you mentioned Peru, like anything cotton, textile-based, natural textiles is great for nearshoring. When you get into synthetic textiles, Asia has really dominated the development and innovation in that space, like recycled textiles. It's changing. They're setting up more shop in different countries, but that is still evolving. So natural textiles, knits, things like that can be amazing. Jewelry, great candidate. Leather goods, great candidate. We see a lot of like formulation, cosmetics, skincare, because you have all like the regulations and testing can be really great to do on this side of the world. Oh, there's lots more. Like high-tech electronics, where there's a big focus on intellectual property, we get requests for. Those are all big ones. And then I would say like luxury goods. So people will typically, I would say, go more often to Europe, parts of the US for kind of higher end luxury items that they just like want a certain level of quality for. They want smaller batch. And they want that like made in Italy, made in France. We're doing like perfumes made in France. And that, again, kind of circles back to our original conversation about like, why do people want this? What are the benefits? Sometimes the brand story is really, really important. So you have the regular, like made in the USA, rah, rah, rah brand story. That's common. But you have other like angles to a brand, like people making swimwear. They might really want it to be like made in Brazil, made in Colombia. There's like a vibe to that. And different things. If you're making alpaca stuff made in Peru, this is a no-brainer for you. So versus like made in China can feel a little less authentic for that kind of product. And so that's a big kind of motivation for people as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
I love that. I love that call out too. Just that there are opportunities to, when you think about your brand and building that product, what do you want it to represent? But also knowing that there might be limitations, right? Depending on what that fabric is, depending on what your cost structure is. Are you trying to get into, a TJ Maxx or a Walmart versus a Nordstrom, a Saks, right? Like there's going to be some different filters you'll have to put within that product. But knowing that you even mentioned 10 to 20% more, like that doesn't sound too crazy.
No. And if it actually gets the product that you want delivered to you at the quality you want, like that's what's important for the brand. I will say that I was developing canvas tote bags for a long time and I was in China. I was not able to get duck weight canvas, which is like the type LOB and type super heavy, like sail weight in China. I just wasn't able to find it. We had to move it Nearshore because it was what we wanted and it wasn't available there. China did not excel at heavyweight wovens. So that's a good example, but we've spent a lot of time talking about the product and the materials. I want to know about the actual interactions with these factories who are nearshore. What would you say are like the biggest differences between working with a factory overseas and nearshore?
Okay, so there's like good and bad and everything in between. I would say the things that people are a little startled by who have been used to working in China, particularly, or countries like that, is that it's a little less urgent in terms of replies, right? You'll write to a factory in China, really pick any hour of a 24-hour day and get a response pretty quickly. That's not going to be the case. Definitely not going to be the case in Europe. You'll get a response the next day, like 10 a.m. Not the case in the US. Yeah. So people are, they're a little bit, they have to adjust to that piece. And it's not every factory. It's something that we are kind of training factories on throughout Latin America is how to kind of imitate some of these business practices that have helped a lot of the Asian factories dominate the landscape. So, but things are always changing. But that has been something that we've seen. And then the other big shock for people, and I would say out of everything we talk about today, this is probably the most challenging part of nearshoring, so you kind of got to like gear yourself up, is that the factories are not necessarily just going to coordinate your whole supply chain for you in terms of like sourcing every little label, zipper, piece of packaging. Oh, no problem. I'll do the artwork for you. It'll take us 4 hours, but not a problem. Labor costs are too high. There's just a different attitude towards doing a lot of free work in order to get a client. So you really have to come in and say, okay, my product needs like 6 different things, right? It needs a belly band and it needs 6 buttons and it needs a zipper, whatever. And you really should be prepared to either find sources from them yourself, or you're going to compensate the factory for helping you locate them in terms of locating the suppliers that are producing them, figuring out which version you like of that product. All of that takes work and sampling. So one of those 2 things is likely going to happen. That takes more time during the product development phase. But the benefit, if you do the work up front, is that you now have direct sources for everything that you need. It's not like working overseas where you're not really sure who the subcontractors are because you're just getting this finished product usually. You don't know, right? And so all your subcontractors, what the costs are, like if a material is not going to get just substituted out. That would happen a lot when we work overseas, that all of a sudden, that looks a little different this run. I don't know. Is it exactly the same? Like that's not going to happen. So it's like you kind of pay up front and then the longer term you have more control.
That's such a good point. And it's something that I knew in the back of my head, but I kind of forgot. Some of the domestic factories just in the US that I've worked with. I had a really big factory in Long Island that I worked with for many years. And same thing, we were doing a big blanket order for home goods. And they were like, what hangers are we putting these on? And we were like, oh, shoot, can you find us a hanger? And they're like, no, absolutely not. You let us know what hangers we're putting these on. So we had to go to China and find the hangers and ship them over and do all that stuff. It was worth it. It was a great product. But that I think is ideal for people who are really managing their own brand top down, less ideal for someone who's like a flash in the pan. So someone who's just like getting one product in and out, they're trying to do something quick on Instagram or who knows what. So it really separates out people who are serious about their brand, its identity, and their business versus people who are like after a quick buck.
Yeah, and listen, like you invest in it, like everything else. So if you do want to pay someone to help you source stuff, like individual components, you can use a platform like ours, or you can also hire someone to do it, and it's done, right? So you will expect to pay between, I would say, $50 and maybe $200 an hour. It really ranges. People who will support in sourcing. That includes factories, but also a lot of like technical designers, product developers will help do that too. So it is something you can just kind of treat as your development costs, if you want to.
So let's talk about if someone's thinking about nearshoring, what would be one nugget of advice before they start on their journey? Like is there anything we haven't talked about yet still that would be important for them to know?
Yes. So it's being flexible with what you are about to make. So you come in with your vision, right? Like 100%, I want it like this. You'll be better off if you say 70%, I need it to be like this. And I'm kind of open to how this 30% ends up going, whether that's a material, whether that's an assembly test, something for every product. It's so different. It's better to be open-minded because you might make some design changes. You might have to make some pricing changes, whatever it is. And if you can do that, you'll be much better off. It's the people that are too rigid and won't compromise on anything. You might not be successful.
I have found also that when you do that and when you really force a factory into doing it your way 100%, you usually get a subpar product because the factory is likely the expert in that material. You're talking about jewelers and leather workers and people who excel in alpaca. When you lean on these factory owners and workers and account reps, they see this day in, day out. They're going to be able to say, hey, if you switched your fabric to be slightly like this or slightly like that, you're going to get a better outcome. If you're open to that, I think it typically yields a better product.
We talk about that too, just from a cost standpoint, right? In our course, we talk about this, like what are your non-negotiables? And to your point, Liz, what's the 30%, the 40%, the 20% that you can flex on? Because that might even be where you can find some significant cost savings because the factory is going to try to come to you with the most efficient way to get something made for them, right? So you might have sent a retail sample or an inspo sample over that was sewn or constructed one way, and they come back with like, hey, by the way, this could be way more efficient and effective if we do it this way, right? So I love that call out. I think that is great to know for nearshoring how important it is. And I think that's really just global as well. Something that we believe in is just making sure
Absolutely.
You're open to the possibility that your product may need to tweak and change.
Open to the possibility of magic.
Yeah, because sometimes it's a happy change. You go in thinking one thing. I mean, that's like a metaphor for life. So,
Yep.
yes, I think it can improve. Also, if you are a brand and you've never point blank asked your factory, is there anything I could do to save money while I'm making this product? You'd be surprised. I bet if you ask brands,
we are not surprised.
have 80% asked? Definitely not. It's only a handful have typically actually like point blank asked because they've assumed, oh, well, the factory would tell me. They do not. I don't know why. They just don't, right? First of all, it's not always aligned for them. They might want to do things the more expensive way, but I don't even think it's always for that reason. It's just that's not they're not thinking always in those terms. And one of the most common ones we see is like, you're not cutting your fabric in an efficient way. So you're wasting fabric, like the way your pattern adjustment is. And the factory's like, well, you're the one paying per yard on the fabric. It's not, they're not losing sleep over it per se, but there's lots of examples. So that's like a piece of homework I would give to all brands. Even if you're happy with your factory, everything, just ask that question and see what you get.
100%. I started, one of the companies I worked for in like my first 6 months, I saved them like $4 million. And they were like, what did you do? I was like, I just asked them for better pricing. That was it. I didn't say that. I was like, I did a whole lot. I probably deserve a raise. Just kidding. No, it was really just asking a question that hadn't been asked.
It is. And, there's so much we could talk about with pricing. We won't go down that path, but like sometimes going and repricing with a factory at a much higher quantity than you're producing at lets you see kind of like their basement where they're willing to go. And then you might not have to reach that full quantity. You might come up just like a little bit more, but you kind of know that they can get there. And so that can be something that's really effective too.
Liz, it sounds like you took our course and you're like quoting from it.
I'll have you back, Liz, to do a whole podcast on pricing because we literally gave a presentation in Vegas. This is like literally all the ways to find your in that pricing and make sure you know what is the basement, to your point, right? Like, what does your product at scale look like? So that is for a later podcast, but we might have you on for that one because I think that could be a whole another episode. So let's get into what you've actually built. So I feel
yes, we've been like talking around it.
Yeah, we've been talking around it. Everyone knows now your background. You obviously, you know your shit. So like, let's talk about what you have set out to build, what you have built, and what its purpose is and how it's serving clients, you know, in this product development journey of theirs.
Yes. Okay. So at Nearshore, I have two other co-founders and we have a team. So it is a team effort. And we have built a sourcing platform specifically focused on nearshoring suppliers. So like in Alibaba, like any of these other sourcing platforms, brands can come on and just look for factories, material suppliers, product developers in those specific countries. They come on, they submit an RFQ, which just is like a simple sourcing request. And then we have a few different ways they connect with factories. For free, they are able to do that, which is nice. Like any brand listening should just come on, just see what's out there. You submit an RFQ and then it goes into a project center that all of our factories see. We have a lot of factories on the site and they'll reach out if they think it's a fit. So does it guarantee that your perfect ideal factory necessarily sees your project? We have a lot of different projects, but they might, and it's free. So I recommend everyone starts there because we see a lot of great connections being made that way. The second thing that people can do is they can submit these sourcing requests, and then we have a very cool AI matching tool. So this is a paid feature, but you tell, the AI kind of what you're looking for in a supplier. You could say, I want a knitwear supplier in Latin America. I want it to be woman-owned, and I want to produce under 500 units. Pick your version of things, and it will spit out like, hey, these 3 factories are a good fit for you to speak with. And so that can really make your sourcing a lot more laser focused. I like to call it precision sourcing. So out of all the thousands of options out there, you're kind of cutting through the noise and figuring out who you should be spending your time chatting with. And then we have a more kind of fully outsourced version where people can get sourcing support and they're working with someone on our team to like set everything up for them. Essentially, they're just saying, this is what I want. And they're getting like a whole lot of guidance on kind of outsourced sourcing. So those are like the different levels and tiers. But in essence, it's finding and working with nearshoring suppliers.
What have been some of your favorite success stories since you've been building this platform and seeing customers that have gone through the journey of utilizing Nearshore AI?
So we have seen a lot of products come through. And I have been most excited by some of the very large electronics orders, right? Because these are not like t-shirts. These are not, these are not like $5,000-$10,000 like t-shirt purchase orders. These are very, very large partnerships. And we've seen brands that have not had success overseas, either because there's a privacy issue or some sort of issue developing what are quite complex products that they are having success doing so in the US. It also converges with this kind of big reindustrializing movement in the US where they're trying to do more kind of high-tech manufacturing and really like bringing manufacturing back to this country. So it's exciting. It's very new, but it's exciting to kind of witness that playing out in real time. So that has been one. The others have been brands who have been producing overseas and all of a sudden got hit with these tariffs and were just like really out a lot of money, and it's stressful because they were succeeding. So we've seen some baby product brands and some apparel brands that all of a sudden have just found new sources and they're like cruising again. So I would say those are my favorites.
Because that seeing someone falter when they're just like on their way up and then be able to recatch their footing and take off is such an inspiring thing. And I was thinking about the electronics, that's got to be just such a tough thing to do from far away.
Yeah, because there's a lot on the line. You're investing a lot. It's better to be there. It's a longer, more risky, expensive product development process. So being able to do stuff like that domestically can be great. So yeah.
So what are you most excited about as you think about where Nearshore AI is headed?
So my passion throughout all of this, I love working with brands, but I also love working with factory owners. So as we just like deepen our relationships with these factory owners, what I did, so we're venture funded. What I did when we first raised money was I spent a year really going out and connecting with factories all over Latin America, because for anyone in this space, they're just harder to connect with. There hasn't been the same kind of like digitized database of these suppliers. So it was really exciting. We were talking with suppliers who had produced for like larger brands, but had never worked with like an e-commerce entrepreneur, like someone who would be maybe more in our space, and they're eager to do it. They're talented. And so that I just want to do more of that, like connecting those parties, because it's like that rising tide lifts all boats. Like it's exciting for the factory. It's exciting for the brand. It's really great. So I think that's my path.
You gave me goosebumps when you said that, because that's actually my favorite part of sourcing and manufacturing as well. It's like, I love my factory owners. I love seeing how things are made, going to new countries, seeing how they do it different over here versus over here. And so I love that.
So let's talk to our listeners about where they can find more information about the amazing platform that you've built and how they can access it.
Yes, so they should go to nearshored.ai and they can create an RFQ right from there. Also, if you just kind of follow the account setup prompts, you can create your sourcing request later. It will kind of ask you for information now, but you can log in, get a free account. That's definitely where you should start. I always tell everyone they can email me. It's liz@nearshored.ai. I am one of those people that will send a quick reply to everyone who messages. So any quick questions or anything about the platform, I'm happy to answer.
That's amazing. And then we'll make sure in the show notes that we have the link to both the platform as well. If you decide to do a paid option, we do have a discount code that will also load in there for the sourcing gals. So for those that are excited to try this out, I know I'm excited. We've talked.
Oh, I've spent some time sitting in my bed at night on the platform, and I love it. And it just makes me I think that my husband saw me getting ideas of things I could make and bring in, and he's like, stop. Stop.
So great. I just think it's an amazing tool, again, for those product-based founders to do on your own. And then even for us as product development consultants to help other people, because like I said, my background, aside from my years in Peru, the majority of my background in product development, my factory connects are truly on the other side of the globe. So to be able to have this tool selfishly, personally for us to connect,
I love it,
our customers, our product-based founders that are needing someone like us to come in and help them. This is a great tool for us that we've already, again, started utilizing. I'm really excited, Liz, to continue to use as we move forward with then helping others.
We welcome product development people who are helping brand source. They are signing up and we want to help them because that's a long-term relationship. We want to make it easy for them. So yes.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I hope everyone has had a great time today learning more about nearshoring and also this amazing platform that we keep talking about. Liz, thank you so much for your expertise. We are definitely having you back on because there's a lot more things that we could dive into.
Right. You're just like a pea in our pod. It's all very similar passions and experience. And we're so happy you were able to come on and chat with the Sourcing Gals audience about what you're building with your team. And because it's phenomenal. We're excited to dive in.
Very excited. So thanks again, Liz, for coming.
Thank you so much, ladies.
You're welcome.
This was fun.
So until next time, we'll see you back here on
The Sourcing Gals.